So I'm reading an excerpt from one of the chapters, and it's called A Time of Horses and Dust, a Dream Come True. Imagine a small golden Palomino stallion brought home from the bazaar, now stamping his feet in the straw-filled shadows of our stables, bought by my mother to be a companion horse to her large, magnificent chestnut bay thoroughbred. And this was a riding horse for us children. Under the massive bougainvillea vines, ruled by John Dad, our syce or groom, the stables were my favorite place to play, either in the sweet-smelling hay or up on the roof where we could spy on John Dad. He would be crouched on his knees, squatting in the shade to smoke his pungent hand-rolled beedies, cheap hand-rolled tobacco rolled in tondu leaves. He ruled over us with a very gruff affection. He tolerated us, but he adored my mother. She spoke to him as a near equal, unfathomable in his rough life. But the horses were a world they knew together, and they each trusted the other's wisdom. Golden Topaz. Topaz for short. My name was an obvious choice for him. I was good at naming things and recognizing their true nature. This would later become an asset and also a disaster. Mother was the original horse whisperer from nearly a century before the books were written. Crippled at birth, legs and feet maimed from years of brutal medical interventions. She grew up in the British countryside. She was put on a pony at 4 and never looked back. Horses were her freedom and her lifeline. Her wise British cavalry officer father told her she could have all the horses she could take care of. So she soon charmed the stable hands into a few extra. She had jumped show horses at Madison Square Garden, and she played polo in Karachi with the members of the president's bodyguard officers. All of them were enchanted by this blonde, blue-eyed woman who rode horses as well as they did, or better. She was determined that we children would ride as well as possible. Her rigorous, demanding discipline and drills, all in the hot sun and the dust of the polo grounds, even at 5 in the evening, were grueling. The other kids hated it, but I loved it. I loved every moment in the saddle as well as the stable. Eventually, Topaz became mine. Claimed by love and hours in the stable, grooming his dappled gold coat, learning to clean his hooves, delicately carving out chips of matted dung and straw from that sensitive frog in the center, brushing his tail, black-tipped ivory mane, and leaning into his muscled neck, just the right height for me to embrace. And learning his mischievous nature, for he would nip you as soon as your back was turned, and even tried to nip my boots when we're bored with riding slowly, or if you stopped paying attention. When we rode out early Sunday mornings, along with the presidential bodyguards, to exercise the horses along the beaches of Karachi, he was often a very challenging ride. The bodyguard officers were very tall. They're chosen and matched by height, along with their horses, for military presentations. My mother was very short, but her bay mare Folly with 17 hands and more than a match to their horses. Topaz was short, fit for an almost 10-year-old girl, but I had to keep up with all of them. Not an unusual predicament for me, smaller than most of my classmates by a year. Unlike Folly, the gentle bay mare with huge eyes and long lashes and soft breath, she would woof over you as she took in your smell or wrinkled her long dark lips to carefully engulf a little piece of carrot offered to her huge teeth. Folly would let small children play around her feet and never make a mistake. And she would never kick you if you passed too close behind. Topaz would as soon kick you as swish his tail at a fly. I guess he had a harsh life in the streets of Karachi before he came to us. I learned to wear boots in the stable because when a horse steps on you, you don't want to be in slippers or you'll lose your toes. And that's what my mother said. Topaz put me to the test more than once. I loved his dappled gold coat and its dark Arabian underskin, almost more than my own. For a time, he was my king of the world and my ticket to freedom. Sometimes Mother was busy with the affairs of a diplomatic wife or sick children or servant difficulties. These happened often in random order. Inside our walled compound with its shady trees, adequate waters, and servants' quarters, our servants had a relatively easy life compared to the 2 or 3 million refugees crowding around Karachi proper. So our servants were always trying to negotiate a few more relatives into the compound. Always sweet-talking my mother into how helpful it would be to have them here. A sister, an auntie, a nephew. Shortly, we had 16 dependents, and they were thrilled to take care of us. A major hierarchy of religion and caste ruled their world, and we could not intervene. It was less than 10 years after partition. It was still a desperate economy, perilous government stability, and they were learning to be independent. Of course, I would know none of this until years later. I was still in the guarded playground of childhood, but I saw the huge, endless refugee camps. Millions sprawled in the desert and down to the ocean. The streets were full. People, bicycle rickshaws, camel carts, tongas, donkeys, cattle grazing on the asphalt for a single strand of dried grass. Herds of goats. The stench of urine and worse everywhere. One area we called Breathless Corner because you just couldn't hold your breath long enough to get past it, even with air conditioning. People lived in this. The bazaars were a little better. We children were never allowed out of the car in the bazaars because swarms of children, maimed and otherwise, would swarm the car, and whoever stepped out with cries of "Bakshish, bakshish, mem sahab," or "Chota mem sahab" if I ever got outside. They were desperate. They were like an ant colony interrupted by a sugar cube, and we would be engulfed. But on the days I rode out with John Dad, we did not ride the main thoroughfares along Bonus Road or White Avenue with dusty shaded shoulders, wide enough for horses and bicycles. When I rode, instead, we took another route, one where John Dad could play King of the Mountain astride a huge shining show horse with its embroidered blue quilted saddle pads and towing me on a lead rein behind him through a vast sea of dusty black heads. I felt like a dame, towed behind a great freighter and glad to have him leading me through the currents of humanity. The world of the alleyways of commerce of beggars and the exotic odors of cooking fires, spices, colorful fabrics, and an occasional passing camel with tinkling ankle bells and a dull clanging of the neck below its mournful face. Their huge heads swayed side to side as they walked, drooling spittle, carrying the loads of hay that would show up at our house. Often, when we climbed the steep sand dunes formed by the winds off the ocean, Topaz would balk. This annoyed my mother, who allowed me to ride off the lead rein for these adventures. Worst of all was when the sand began to flow downhill over his strong legs, and he would start to kneel, ready to roll me off into the sand. After a few very successful attempts to dismount me, I learned that I needed to be the rider, not the passenger. I had to control him or suffer being tossed into the sand yet again. Oh, the mischief in that horse. But I loved seeing his true nature rise, despite the years of service in the bazaar. And I loved pounding down the beach, cantering and galloping through wind-tossed spume. And the larger horse trip would gallop away, and for a time, I could pretend I was alone. Me and my horse, with the sun shining on Topaz's glossy skin, and the world unfolding between the twin curves of his ears as we trotted along. I was brave, I was strong, I was adventurous, I was enchanted, no longer a child, but a person. For a small girl, a horse gave me height, freedom, and a new perspective on the world and who I could be in it. I was faithful only to the horse in my studies. All else fell away. On Topaz, I could enter the world of grown-ups, even the periphery. The heat of Karachi is unbearable. Sometimes 110 degrees in the shade. It is basically a desert leading to the ocean. There are lots of trees in the center of the city where they are fed with water, sewage, and mountains of bird shit. From thousands and thousands of trees that settle onto huge banyan trees at sunset. Water is such a precious commodity here.